Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range 2023. This is a great BookTube event invented by Muggle K. Vaughn last year, in which we read Western novels. He's assembled a whole posse of great co-hosts, and I have a ball doing this. I learned a lot from last year's June on the Range, but I also had a great deal of fun. And all year long since then, I have been accumulating ratty old paperback Westerns. Whenever I find them, I've just been getting all the ones that I see that I know I don't already have or that I know won't please me in the slightest. Usually they're completely unknown quantities to me. And I figure for June on the Range 2023, I will sort of burn my way through a lot of those before I move on to ebooks. I'll start interspersing ebooks with my reading maybe next week. But for last night, I just went to the little pile of these Westerns that I've accumulated over the years. I picked one from 1963. This thing, The Crossing, by John S. Daniels, with this gorgeous Western cover there. One of the points that I made over and over again last year, because it really struck me, I'd just taken it for granted before then, is how many of these old dime store Westerns that just, they're here and gone, nobody remembers them, they're never going to be reprinted, no one's ever heard of them. How many of them have such beautiful covers. That's just a lovely cover, and it's by far from being alone. And even the Westerns that I have assembled over the last year, to say nothing of the ones that I've already had or that that I've seen or that I have ebooks of, this is the story of a boy, of an 18-year-old boy, which is a little bit rare in my readings of Westerns. Usually they aren't Bildungsromans. Usually they are about hardened, toughened men who have a bright and shining noble Sir Galahad soul, but it's deep inside an exterior that looks like lorn green on a bad day. And that's not the case here. This is the story of Mark Kelton, who's 18 years old. And he is traveling in a covered wagon with his parents from their old ranch in the Willamette Valley to Oregon to start a new life. And he's away from their covered wagon for a bit, and when he comes back, he finds his parents murdered. Both of them have been stabbed to death. And he is stunned, as you would be, right? He has no idea what could happen, no idea what to do, no idea where he's going, no idea what became of, for instance, the $1,000 of stake money that they had in their carriage. He's completely lost, and he is immediately saved. He is immediately taken under the wing of a hard, bitter, brutal man named Bronk Curtis. I counted it as a little blessing that the hero of the book is not called Bronk. I was getting a little bit tired of heroes with weird names, like Boot or Bronk or Steel or whatever. This is just Mark. 18-year-old Mark is taken under Bronk's tutelage. Bronk is not overflowing with the milk of human kindness, but he decides to help Mark and teach him the ways of the West. Decides to teach him how to ride a little bit better than he already rides, how to shoot, how to suspect other people, how to notice when there's trouble, how to size up a room. Bronk is not all that forthcoming about how he learned any of these things, but they have adventures together. And over the course of time, probably halfway through this book, these Westerns are always really short. That's one of their appeals. This is 140 pages. About halfway through the book, maybe a little bit less than that, Mark is learning the whole time. He's paying attention, very close attention to Bronk. But not just to Bronk, what Bronk is teaching him, but also to what Bronk is like. And a chunk of the way into the book, he decides, in a rather touching scene, a rather wrenching little scene, that he has to part ways with this man who saved him and has taught him so much. He's more and more, his internal moral sense is more and more being bothered by who Bronk is. So they part ways, and shortly thereafter, Mark takes up with a man named Herb Jackson, who's another strong adult male in Mark's life, but he's a very different kind of figure than Bronk is. He's far more thoughtful, far more circumspect, a good man. And Mark also falls in love with his daughter, Ruth. And I was expecting the worst. I was expecting that the second half of this book would be all aw shucks ma'am courtin' scenes like I've seen in a couple of Westerns so far in 2023, and that really, really bothered me because of how poorly they're done. But no, that doesn't happen. Ruth is a real person, and their marriage is real. which is really kind of nice in a low-key kind of way. It's kind of nice. And Mark throws in with Herb Jackson, and they start a ranch together, and it does well. About 2/3 of the way into the book, what had been before then, I admit, a rather sleepy plot, is goosed into action by an act of God. There is the entire valley has mild weather for the beginning of one winter, and then storms come like crazy for the second half of the winter. And when those storms melt, they subsume the valley and even some of the hillsides of the area where they are, just subsume them. So that, as Herb Jackson puts it at one point, the water is so high that it could flood anything, and it destroys a lot of hay crops in the neighborhood, so that a lot of people are coming to Herb Jackson, who's been very careful about his own hay, the preventer that you need to get cattle across the winter. He's been very careful with it, but he has enough for his own herd and not anybody else's, and men keep coming to his door, asking and sometimes angrily demanding that he help them to survive the winter. It creates a bit of ill will, and it works on Herb Jackson. He is another character in this book who's well drawn. Far more interesting in a lot of ways than Mark Kelton himself. Mark Kelton is gaining layers of age and sophistication as the book goes on, but not many and not as fast as you'd like. There are Western novels that I've read that are Bildungsroman that do have young men as their heroes, and sometimes they're more effective than this. That natural catastrophe ups the tension at the 2/3 mark, but the fact that the bad snow melt is the thing that ups the tension is a really good indication of how much the tension needed upping, and it does. And the whole time that's going on, there wasn't any fisticuffs, no gunfight between Mark and Bronk when they parted ways. Bronk set up a ranching concern of his own, not far from where Mark and Herb Jackson are. But all throughout the book, hovering over the narrative, there is the idea that isn't enough. That sooner or later, Mark and Bronk are going to have it out. Not necessarily a gunfight, but something far more emphatic than what had happened. And that hovering sense of a confrontation that's coming is done well by John Daniels. I don't know anything about John Daniels. I don't have any idea who he is. I've never read another book by him. But it's done well, and the way it's done well consistently throughout the book is that we learn a lot about Mark by how reluctant he is to turn on Bronk. No one likes Bronk. They all recognize what kind of a brutal, hard, probably criminal man he is. But Mark refuses to do anything but give him the benefit of the doubt at all times, right up to the end of the book, when it looks like he might be implicated in some serious crimes, and when everyone wants Mark to turn on him, even Ruth is saying, you'll never learn, will you? This guy is no good. Mark, understandably, can't let go of the fact that he owes his life to this man. Now, the reader, at this point, 2/3 of the way into the book, might say, now, I've been following you all this time, and yeah, he helped you out when you were stunned, in shock by your parents' murder, but you're pretty handy and pretty smart. I think you would have made it without Bronk. The reader is saying that, and maybe a lot of the characters are too. Herb Jackson certainly is, but Mark himself is never saying it. But even with that story hanging over the plot, and even with me expecting that at the outcome, John Daniels, he gives us that, but he gives us one extra twist that I swear I didn't see coming. It comes from the wrong character, so that if I had expected it, I would have expected it to come from a different quarter, and it's a heck of a twist. Looking back, now that I've finished the book, I see, I'm being really careful with spoilers here, even though I doubt any of you will ever come across this book when you're out at your used bookstores. I really doubt it. But looking back on the book now that I've finished it, I could kick myself that I didn't see it coming. And that's the hallmark of a good twist, right? Is that it doesn't anger you, except at yourself. It doesn't anger you at the author. You look back and say, I wish I could have seen that. I should have been able to predict that. So that part was enjoyable. And there's also a lovely, lovely little scene. You blink and you miss it. A lovely little scene in which uh, Ruth is in bed with Mark. They're lying there in bed ready to go to sleep, like you people love to do, when she quietly informs him that she's pregnant. And he doesn't know what to think. True to form for his character, the very first reaction he has is to wonder if she will be okay, because there's no doctor in the town. She has to sort of delicately tell him, women have been giving birth without doctors for a long time. There is a woman at the nearby fort. She will help. She's helped many women. It'll be fine. It's only once he realizes that she will be okay that he starts to like the idea, which is very in line for the character. But despite all of these elements, this wasn't all that exciting to read. I mean, it kept me reading, definitely. It's 130 pages long, though. I mean, a car repair manual could keep me reading for that long. It kept me reading, but unlike a couple of the Westerns that I have read that were kind of lackluster, when I finished those, I thought, all right, well, that was kind of lackluster, but no one could have made it anything otherwise. Whereas here, this is another example where I kept thinking, what would Charles Portis have made of this? What would Larry McMurtry or Elmore Leonard or Lauren Esselman, what would they have done with something like this? I think they would have done more. I don't know anything about John Daniels. I'll be a little modified if it turns out that John Daniels is a pen name for any of those authors that I just mentioned. That's a problem with Westerns, is that everybody's writing a million of them under a million different pen names. But anyway, certainly not a waste of time at all. I would have been really, really disappointed if a book with a cover this pretty ended up being a total dud. I don't understand what crossing is referred to in the title, unless it's Mark's crossing from youth to adulthood. That seems a little highfalutin. Now the rest of the book is like that, but I enjoyed this. It's just, I don't know, maybe I peaked early with June on the Range 2023. There's still 3 weeks to go, but hanging at Whiskey Smith was so good that I'm waiting for something else to have that kind of not only solid plot, but conviction. I want the writer to have conviction. I don't want them to be pinky in the air, sort of lightly satirizing the genre they're writing in. But I also don't want them to plod. And there's a little plotting going on here. So that's our Western for today. The Crossing by John Daniels. I knew a John Daniels once, but just to put it mildly, he did not write this book. No way. So he was not a writer at all. And the only character in this book he would have identified with, if you know what I mean, would have been Ruth. But not a waste of time by any means. So I'm going to do the same thing. Before I go for another week or so, before I go to ebooks, I have 1 million Westerns as ebooks. But before I do that, I'm gonna keep exploring in these old ratty paper Westerns that I have. So we'll see what we do next. I'll pick later tonight when I'm assembling my night's reading. I'll pick a Western, and we'll see what happens. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.